Good morning. Glad everybody can be here today. My name is Jeff Heinzman. I work at the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. I oversee the Small Business Development Center network for the state, and was asked this weekend by Scott Stewart from the governor's office if I would come and deliver some brief remarks. You'll notice that the invitation says Governor Daniels was invited to speak. Scott was going to speak, but then Scott pulled a little innovation of his own. He was planning on getting married in December in England, and apparently he didn't realize how long he was going to have to stay in England in order to officially get married there. So he got married on Sunday, and on Saturday he asked me to do this. But if the governor were here, I know one of the things he would immediately say is that there are a few gatherings that are more important to this state than bringing the people in this room together today. The whole focus of the IEDC comes down to jobs and where do jobs come from. And while we get very excited about large companies that come, those companies come and go, and we compete very well for them in Indiana. We're doing quite nicely on that. But the future of Indiana's economy, and as a consequence, the future of Indiana government, Indiana revenue, all comes from merging companies, homegrown companies, entrepreneurs, people who have found a value-added way to innovate, maybe making something better than it was or making something altogether new. We have focused on that at the IEDC through my program with Companies to Watch, an Edward Lowe Foundation program that brings entrepreneurs together. Some of our sponsors from Companies to Watch have started a new program called Exec Connect, where we bring the CEOs of those mid-market companies together and get them to share experiences and learn from each other. And that is very, very important, because when you get down to it with jobs, it's not just where do jobs come from, but where do the ideas come from. And there's a new book out by Stephen Johnson, literally called Where Do Ideas Come From? And what he has found is that the aha moment, the epiphany, is really the exception and not the rule. He goes back to where he started studying this was with the Enlightenment and the first coffee house in England in 1650. And if you think about what people were doing in 1650 in England before the coffee house, what were they drinking all day? The water wasn't very good. The way they could drink something was to have alcohol in it. And so you had people that were literally, drinking beer with breakfast and drinking all day, and then the coffee house started, and, you moved from a depressant to a stimulant, and you had the Enlightenment. So, but it was also sort of the format of that, the gathering place, the coffee house where people came together and socialized and talked and had those ideas collide with one another. It's what Mr. Johnson calls the slow hunch. The fact of the matter is that ideas don't tend to just pop up. They germinate. They have a long half-life. And sometimes the ideas come from connecting different hunches. They'll fade into view over a long period of time. Google is a company that does something to sort of spawn this. They have their innovation time off. They have 20% of time for certain positions that can be used for people literally to just go and think and try and come up with something new. That sort of hunch cultivation. But getting people together and having them share ideas is also something, it's difficult to square that circle with the idea of protecting innovation. But protecting innovation, very, very important, obviously, for economic reasons, but almost as important is connecting innovation in that way, bringing people together. If the governor were here, he would likely mention Virginia Postrel, too, who's one of his favorite authors and commentators. She talks about the difference between people who think things should be built around a central authority that says, here's the conclusion, here's the direction we need to go. Those are the stasis people. And the dynamism. And this is, I think, where he's tried to steer state government, and I think where many people in this room try to steer their organizations through dynamism with an open-ended society where creativity and enterprise operating under predictable rules will generate progress in unpredictable ways. The governor would also mention innovation and entrepreneurship, how that has sort of two dimensions, a sandbox dimension and a cultural dimension. The sandbox in Indiana is really excellent. It's takes a long time to make the quality of that sandbox, of that arena where people have the opportunity to act and innovate and live, be strong. But it doesn't take very long to tear it down. A few of the things that the state has done in recent years sort of create the certainty and the good sandbox, property tax caps, which I'm sure the governor would actually please urge you all to vote yes for the property tax caps in November. I heard him do that just last week. So, the balanced budgets that we've had, having a true surplus, having a AAA credit rating, so that if Indiana did decide to borrow, unlike Illinois that is borrowing right now at about 7.5% interest, we could borrow at 2 point something. Venture capital investment tax credit, getting Hoosiers to invest in Hoosier companies, and patent-derived income tax exemption. That's another thing that came into being just a couple years ago that enables people who have a patent granted in Indiana to actually exempt some of the income derived from that patent from their state income taxes. So these are all great strengths of Indiana's sandbox, but the cultural dimension is a tougher nut to crack, and that's, I think, what a lot of the people in this room really can come together to cultivate and help bring it together. We have tremendous assets in this state, tremendous universities, many of whom are representing IU. We have great people. Innovation with some of them is being born of necessity, like the Delphi engineers who no longer work for Delphi but have come up with their own companies at Inventrek up in Kokomo. We also have the Indiana Economic Development Association, the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, and really these entities do exist to bring people together to foster innovation in this state. I'm going to give one last example of what happens when you bring people together and how ideas tend to germinate. And this came from the TED Talk that the author of that book, Where Do Ideas Come From, gave. It was October 4th, 1957, and Sputnik had been launched, and there were a group of scientists in Laurel, Maryland at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab who said, you know, can we hear that? Is anyone listening to it? And the Soviets actually made it very easy to obtain that signal because they were afraid of people saying it was a hoax. So they got up and they found it and they started listening to it, and they said, you know what? We could calculate the speed too. And then we could use the Doppler effect to calculate the actual trajectory and where it's actually flying. And they got a little time from their supervisors, and they spent some time doing this over a couple of weeks, and they actually mapped the exact trajectory of Sputnik. And then a couple weeks later, their boss came to them and said, hey, can you guys just found the unknown location of an orbiting satellite from a known location on Earth. Could you do that in reverse? And they thought about it, and they did a little work, and turned out that that was actually easier than doing it the other way. And they said, sure. He said, that's great, because I've got these new nuclear submarines, and we're working on how do we know where they are, and how can we better target anything that we might, God forbid, need to fire from those submarines towards its targets. So they did that, and they created the tracking systems. If we put enough satellites up in the air, we can find just about anything to a pretty significant degree. 30 years later, the Reagan administration actually opened that platform so that anyone could use it. And, you know, pretty sure that everybody here has something that, here's my location right now, because we all have GPS on our cell phones and in our cars, and that's because an idea of can we find Sputnik's signal morphed over time, 30 years later was opened to the public, and that idea germinated over that long period of time. So it's not just an aha moment. Probably a lot of the great ideas that are going to lead to a lot of innovation in Indiana already exist. They're already at your institutions, they're already at your companies, they're already in somebody's garage. But it doesn't just happen in the blink of an eye. There's not usually an aha moment. And this group of people, hopefully, can really help to foster the connections, foster the networks that will help make those ideas germinate as quickly as they can, help the ones that are already out there germinating get realized, and bring them to fruition so that Indiana and the country will have a much better future. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to participate today and discussing the topics that will be here that will help shape some recommendations to do that for Indiana. Thank you very much.